There's a photograph taken on a Thursday evening in July 2023. Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, rush hour. If you look closely at the frame, past the blur of pedestrians and the glare of storefront windows, you can see him. A tall man in business clothes, bag over his shoulder, mid-stride. Unremarkable, forgettable. 10 seconds later, that same man would be surrounded by federal agents. The arrest happened so smoothly that most passers-by didn't notice. No struggle, no dramatic scene, just a circle of dark suits closing in, and a man who towered over them all, quietly complying. By the time anyone thought to pull out their phone, it was over. What those pedestrians didn't know, what none of us knew until that moment, was that they'd been walking past him for years, on this street, in this city. A man who fits so perfectly into the architecture of everyday life that he became invisible. Rex Heuermann, architect, husband, father, and according to prosecutors, something else entirely. For 13 years, the bodies had been accumulating along a desolate stretch of beach highway on Long Island. Young women, their remains discovered in the scrub brush off Ocean Parkway. The case had spawned documentaries, podcasts, theories. The killer had been given a name, the Long Island serial killer, but he'd never been given a face, until now. This is the story of how a man built two lives, one in plain sight, one in shadow. How he navigated the permits and protocols of New York City by day, and allegedly became something unrecognizable by night. How he sat in meetings about building codes and accessibility requirements, while police were still discovering the women he's accused of leaving along Gilgo Beach. It's about the families who waited more than a decade for answers, the investigators who refused to let the case go cold, and the uncomfortable truth that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the man standing next to you on Fifth Avenue. September 13th, 1963. Massapequa Park, Long Island. A suburb where the houses line up neat and identical, where everyone knows everyone, and where Rex Andrew Heuermann came into the world as the third child of Theodore and Dolores Heuermann. The family lived on a quiet street on Long Island's South Shore. Two older sisters, a younger brother named Craig. On paper, ordinary. In practice, something harder to define. Theodore Heuermann worked as an aerospace engineer. Satellites, according to his son's later boasts. Dolores stayed home. What happened behind the walls of that house is harder to excavate than you'd think. Childhood leaves fragments, not evidence. But by the time Rex reached Berner High School, certain patterns had emerged. He was tall, already 6 feet 4 inches in his teens, gangly, awkward, the kind of kid who takes up too much space without meaning to. His former classmates remember him as a target, the quiet one, the strange one, everyone's punching bag, as one of them put it years later. John Parisi, who graduated with Heuermann, told reporters he was scared of him. The type of guy, if he snapped, he could really hurt you. But snapping requires breaking first. And what they remember about Rex was how much he could absorb. Insults, shoves, mockery. He'd take it and take it, then walk away. There was an incident in 6th grade, bullying that escalated until a teacher intervened. But the mockery continued through high school, quieter but constant. Another classmate, Don Ophuls, said when he heard about the arrest decades later, he wasn't surprised. He was a recluse, very quiet. Others remember him as simply unwilling to engage. John DiMicoli tried recruiting him for street hockey once. Rex had no interest. He didn't want any part of sports. He didn't want any part of anything. He didn't have the social skills to hold a conversation. Dan Musto, who grew up near the Heuermann house, remembers tension between Rex and his father. Theodore was hard on him, frustrated that his son wasn't more aggressive, more ambitious. In response, Rex acted out, got caught shoplifting, small rebellions. Issues between Heuermann and his father, Musto said, was common knowledge. Then there's the incident from 1980. Berner High School was staging Arsenic and Old Lace, a dark comedy about two elderly sisters who poison and bury a dozen men in their cellar. Rex worked backstage as a stage technician alongside other students. During rehearsal, a female classmate went to lower the curtain. She gripped the rope, pressed the lever, and suddenly found herself yanked toward the ceiling. Someone had added weights to the pulley system, heavy ones. She thought she was going to die. Rex helped her down, apologized. But according to the classmate, that wasn't the point. He'd re-weighted all the curtains so that only someone very strong could operate them. He was marking territory, making himself indispensable, creating a dangerous situation where only he could be trusted to fix it. Criminologist Scott Bond would later call this a fledgling psychopath in development. But the most complicated dynamic in Rex's adolescence seems to have been with his mother. Former classmates described Dolores as controlling, domineering. They describe Rex as bizarrely attached to her, a mama's boy who'd cut conversations short because he had to get home, who talked about her constantly but never mentioned his father. The mother seemed to be his all, one classmate recalled. Scott Bond suggested an unusual incestuous relationship in an emotional sense, a bond that might have been loving on the surface, resentful underneath. Who knows what was ticking beneath the surface, Bond said. He may have been projecting the loving, doting son, when in fact there may have been some deep-seated resentment. It's worth noting that abuse seems to run in the Heuermann family tree. Rex's distant cousin, Reverend Kenneth Heuermann, was accused of drugging and sexually abusing a young girl for 7 years, starting when she was 8. The abuse allegedly occurred in front of other church members. The victim, now in her 70s, sued for $45 million, claiming it gave her dissociative identity disorder. Reverend Heuermann denied everything. Never, 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 he said during a deposition. He died in November 2024. Was Rex also a victim? We don't know. What we know is that childhood abuse appears frequently in the backgrounds of serial offenders. Not as an excuse, as a factor. In 1981, Rex graduated from Berner High School. 5 years later, he earned a degree in architectural technology from the New York Institute of Technology. By 1990, he was working for Greer Construction Corporation. That same year, he married his first wife, Elizabeth Ryan, at St. Peter's Church in New Brunswick, New Jersey. He was an intern. She worked for an office supply company. The marriage didn't last. By 1994, they were divorced. The details remain private. 1994 was a turning point. Rex bought his childhood home from his mother for $170,000. He incorporated his own firm, RH Consultants and Associates, an architectural practice based on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, specializing not in design, but in permits. navigating New York City's labyrinth of building codes and regulations. He was good at it. His client list eventually included names like Cipriani, Target, Nike, Foot Locker. One restaurateur who consulted with him in 2022 described him as the guy when it came to obscure building codes. Aside from thinking he was an only in New York kind of quirky character, the restaurateur wrote on Reddit, "I'd have never imagined he was capable of what he's done. I shudder when I think that I shook his hand." But there were cracks. In 2007, the New York City Department of Buildings launched an investigation after a crumbling Harlem building left 26 people homeless. Rex had been hired to restore the property. Investigators looked into whether he'd misidentified it as vacant. The audits found no pattern of fraud or serious misconduct. The case closed. In 1996, Rex married again. Ása Guðbjörg Ellerup, who went by Asa. She was Icelandic. They married on April 13th, just before she gave birth to their daughter, Victoria. Later, they'd have a son with special needs. To neighbors, the Heuermanns seemed odd, but harmless. The house was a disaster, overgrown, cluttered, paint peeling. People crossed the street to avoid it. Rex tried to be friendly, inviting neighbors to play cards, but most kept their distance. One neighbor, Etienne de Villiers, had to confront Rex after he kept leering over the fence at de Villiers' wife while she sunbathed. "It wasn't pleasant," de Villiers said. "We spoke pretty harshly, but he didn't get aggressive. After that, he never did it again." At work, Rex's employees saw a different side. Muriel Henriquez worked at his firm and found him mostly harmless. "A little bit of a nerd," she said, "and I know everything kind of guy." But there was one incident that stayed with her. Before she left on a cruise for her 40th birthday, Rex asked about her plans. She joked that she'd be in the middle of the ocean where he couldn't find her. He said he could. She laughed it off. On the second day of the cruise, she found a white envelope under her cabin door. Inside was a message from Rex. "I told you I could find you anywhere." Mary Schell, another former employee, remembered meeting Rex in 2007. His face turned red when she walked into his office, like that of a shy teenage boy who had been surprised by a hot girl in the cafeteria. His staff was mostly young women. "The girl next door type," Schell noted. "We knew he was married with a family in Massapequa, but he never spoke of them." Rex loved guns. He collected them. He'd invite colleagues to go hunting or shooting, particularly an attractive coworker who always declined. "It sounded dangerous and creepy," she told Schell. He especially loved talking about bear hunting, baiting an area, lying in wait. He described dressing the game in detail, gleefully grossing people out. After Schell left the firm, she heard from former colleagues that Rex had become increasingly aggressive, trying to poach clients, accusing others of doing the same. When one employee quit to start her own company, Rex was furious. He was spotted outside her building in the early evening, staring up at the second-floor windows where her new firm was based. "My colleagues' minds went quickly to his gun collection," Schell said. "They began locking the elevator and the doors." In early 2022, a French YouTuber interviewed Rex at his Manhattan office. The video shows him at his desk, red-faced, in a button-down shirt, discussing his work with the Department of Buildings. He talks about his patience, his tolerance. He mentions learning furniture making from his father. an aerospace engineer who built satellites. Then he makes an odd comment about using a weapon to get his way. It's subtle, easy to miss, but it's there. How does someone become this? It's the question everyone asks, and the answer is never satisfying, because it's never singular. Not one event, not one trauma, not one moment where a switch flips. Instead, it's accretion, layers. A childhood marked by isolation and humiliation. A father who demanded more than his son could give. A mother whose love may have felt more like possession. Bullying that taught him he was different, less than, outside the circle. Serial killers often describe the sense of fundamental disconnection from other people, an inability to see them as fully real. Psychologists call it a lack of empathy, but that makes it sound clinical, bloodless. What it means in practice is that other people's pain doesn't register. Their fear doesn't matter. They exist as objects, not subjects. For Rex, if prosecutors are correct, that disconnection may have crystallized early. The stage curtain incident, the tracking down of Muriel on her cruise, the leering over fences, small demonstrations of power, testing boundaries, seeing what he could get away with. Then there's the question of fantasy. Every serial offender studied by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has reported having violent fantasies long before committing their first crime. The fantasies start small, often in adolescence. They're fed by pornography, true crime, sometimes childhood abuse. Over time, they escalate. They become more detailed, more elaborate, more necessary. Eventually, for some people, fantasy isn't enough. Court documents allege that investigators found evidence of thousands of searches on Rex's devices related to sadistic and violent pornography. Searches about active serial killers. Searches about the specific victims he's now accused of murdering. Searches about the investigation into those murders. This is classic pattern behavior. Offenders often follow their own cases obsessively. They revisit crime scenes. They insert themselves into investigations. It's part of reliving the experience, maintaining the high. But the transition from fantasy to action requires something else. Opportunity, access, and a realization that you can get away with it. Rex allegedly chose victims who existed on the margins. Sex workers who advertised on Craigslist, who moved from hotel to hotel, whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed or prioritized. Women whose lives made them vulnerable. And he chose them, prosecutors say, when his family was away. When Asa and the children were out of state, leaving him alone in the house in Massapequa Park. If the allegations are true, then Rex spent years constructing a system. Burner phones, separate email accounts, careful timing, disposal sites he'd scouted in advance. This wasn't impulse. This was planning. The so-called HK planning document found on his computer allegedly lays it all out. 87 points on how to commit murder and avoid detection. A troubleshooting guide. Step-by-step instructions on body preparation, disposal, cleanup. It reads, according to investigators, like someone trying to perfect a process. And if you're trying to perfect something, that means you plan to do it more than once. May 2010. A woman named Shannon Gilbert disappeared from a gated community on Long Island's South Shore. She was 23, working as an escort, and she'd gone to meet a client in Oak Beach. Something went wrong. Shannon called 911, terrified, saying someone was trying to kill her. Then she vanished. Police searched for her, combed the beaches, the marshland, the scrub brush along Ocean Parkway. They didn't find Shannon. But on December 11th, 2010, they found someone else. The first set of remains discovered near Gilgo Beach. A young woman wrapped in burlap. She'd been strangled. It would take time to identify her, but eventually they'd learn her name, Melissa Barthelemy. 2 days later, police found 3 more bodies, all women, all strangled, all discarded in the same desolate stretch of beach. Amber Lynn Costello, Megan Waterman, Maureen Brainerd Barnes. They would become known as the Gilgo Four. Melissa Barthelemy. Melissa was 24. She wanted to be a hairdresser. She was living in the Bronx, working as an escort to make ends meet. On July 12, 2009, surveillance footage caught her making a $1,000 deposit at a bank. According to her boyfriend, she had another date scheduled for the next night, somewhere on Long Island. She never came home. Shortly after Melissa disappeared, her younger sister began receiving phone calls from Melissa's cell phone. A man's voice, taunting. He said he'd killed her. The calls came from crowded places in Manhattan: Madison Square Garden, Times Square, places with lots of people, lots of noise, where it would be hard to trace him. The calls continued through late August. Then they stopped. Cell phone records later showed that Melissa's voicemail had been accessed from Massapequa on July 12th, the same day she disappeared. Amber Lynn Costello. Amber was 27. She lived in North Babylon with a roommate. On September 2nd, 2010, she got a call from a client offering $1,500. He called her 3 or 4 times that night. The last call came at 10:30 p.m. He said he was parked down the street. Amber left the house wearing a pink sweatshirt and jeans. She didn't take her phone. She never came back. Megan Waterman. Megan was 22. She was last seen on June 6th, 2010, leaving her hotel in Hauppauge at 1:30 in the morning. Security cameras captured her walking through the lobby of the Holiday Inn Express, heading for the exit. After that, nothing. Maureen Brainerd Barnes. Maureen was 25, living in Norwich, Connecticut. On July 9th, 2007, she traveled to Manhattan to meet a client she'd found on Craigslist. She checked into the Super 8 Hotel in Midtown. Something happened outside the hotel. She was robbed. She decided to go home. Her last confirmed phone call was to her sister from Penn Station. She was reported missing on July 14th. A few days later, a friend of hers received a strange call from an unfamiliar number. The man said he'd seen Maureen recently, that she was living in a whorehouse in Queens. He wouldn't give his name or the address. Said he'd call back with more information. He never did. Maureen's phone pinged near Fire Island within weeks of her disappearance. The search expands. In March 2011, police discovered more remains at Gilgo Beach. Partial remains of a woman who'd been found years earlier in Manorville. Her name was Jessica Taylor. Jessica was 20 when she disappeared in July 2003. She'd been working for a pimp named Khalil White, traveling up and down the East Coast. She decided to go home. Left on July 15th. Her car broke down, but she hitchhiked back to Brooklyn. She was spotted a few days later at Port Authority. Then, nothing. On July 26, 2003, her torso was found in Manorville, wrapped in plastic at the end of an access road. She'd been dismembered. A tattoo on her hip, Remy's Angel, a reference to her pimp, had been mutilated with something sharp. It took 7 months to identify her. A detective in Washington, D.C. recognized the tattoo. In May 2011, investigators confirmed that a skull, hands, and forearm found near Gilgo Beach belonged to Jessica. The others. The search continued. More remains, more victims. Some identified, some not. Valerie Mack, last seen in 2000. Her partial remains had been found in Manorville that same year. More of her remains turned up near Gilgo in 2011. She was 24. An unidentified toddler, thought to be female, around 2 years old, wrapped in a blanket. No signs of trauma. An Asian individual, dressed in women's clothing. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Identity still unknown. And then there was the woman they called Peaches. In 1997, her dismembered body was found at Hempstead Lake State Park in a green plastic container. She had a tattoo of a heart-shaped peach with a bite taken out of it on her left breast. More of her remains were found at Jones Beach in 2011. DNA testing eventually proved that Peaches was the mother of the unidentified toddler. It's worth noting, Rex Heuermann worked as a seasonal employee at Jones Beach State Park between 1981 and 1984. In 2023, police identified another victim, Karen Vergata. Her legs had been found wrapped in plastic on Fire Island in 1996. Her skull was discovered in 2011. She disappeared around Valentine's Day 1996. She was living in Manhattan at the time. Shannon Gilbert. On December 13, 2011, more than a year and a half after she disappeared, Shannon Gilbert's remains were finally found in an Oak Beach marsh, about a quarter mile from where she was last seen. A week earlier, police had found her purse, phone, shoes, and clothing in the same marsh. The official cause of death was ruled inconclusive. Police initially suggested she drowned accidentally after entering the marsh in a panic. But toxicology found no drugs in her system, and an independent autopsy in 2014 found damage to her hyoid bone, often a sign of strangulation. To this day, authorities have not officially connected Shannon's death to the Long Island serial killer case, but it was her disappearance that led to the discovery of everyone else. For years, the case went quiet. Documentaries were made. Podcasts dissected every theory. Amateur sleuths traded speculation online, but no arrests. The initial investigation had been plagued by dysfunction. Suffolk County's former police chief, James Burke, allegedly refused to allow the FBI to participate. Burke resigned in 2015 and was later indicted for civil rights abuses and conspiracy. The FBI formally joined the case that same year. In January 2020, police released a photograph of a belt found at one of the crime scenes, black leather, with initials stamped on it, HM or WH, depending on which way you turned it. Police believed the killer had handled it. None of the victims owned it. Rex Heuermann's grandfather's initials were WH. In February 2022, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison announced the formation of a new task force. Homicide detectives, the FBI, the Suffolk District Attorney's Office, the Suffolk Sheriff's Office. the first time federal, state, and local agencies will jointly dedicate investigators to solving one of the nation's most well-known serial killer cases, Harrison said. 17 months later, they had their man. The evidence. The break came from a vehicle. In March 2022, investigators identified Rex as a person of interest after connecting him to a Chevrolet Avalanche pickup truck. A witness had seen the truck near Amber Costello's location in 2010. The truck was registered to Rex Heuermann. From there, investigators started pulling phone records, bank records, digital footprints. They found burner phones. They found emails linked to those phones. They found American Express records showing Rex using Google Pay to make payments to Tinder, where he had a profile under the name Andy. They found that the burner phones were used in the same locations where Rex was using his credit card, that calls to victims came from the same places where Rex checked voicemail and contacted Melissa Barthelemy's family members. According to court documents, investigators could find no instance where Heuermann was in a separate location from these other cell phones. Then there was the digital trail. One of the burner email accounts had been used to conduct thousands of searches. Sadistic pornography, torture-related content, active serial killers, the specific victims Rex is now accused of murdering, articles about the task force investigating those murders. And then there was the DNA. In July 2022, forensic analysts discovered that female hairs found on 3 of the victims all belonged to someone in the same mitochondrial haplogroup, K1C2. Not a definitive match to one person, but a strong indicator that the hairs could have come from the same woman. In July 2022, an undercover investigator retrieved discarded bottles from a trash can outside Rex's home. In January 2023, another investigator recovered a pizza box from a Manhattan trash can after Rex had eaten from it. DNA testing began in February 2023. The results. One of the DNA profiles from the bottles matched mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2, the same haplogroup as the hairs found on the victims. Investigators believed the DNA belonged to Rex's wife, Asa. The pizza crust sample was compared to a male hair found on one of the victims. On June 12, 2023, the results came back. A match. Same mitochondrial DNA profile. Rex Heuermann. The arrest. July 13, 2023. 5th Avenue, Manhattan. A warm Thursday evening. Rex left his office, bag over his shoulder, walking through rush hour crowds. The agents had been waiting. They moved in quickly, professionally. No drama, no chase. Rex Andrew Heuermann was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. Prosecutors also named him as the prime suspect in Maureen Brainerd Barnes' murder. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. Judge Richard Ambrose denied bail, citing the extreme depravity of the alleged crimes. The search. After the arrest, police executed more than 300 search warrants at Rex's home and office. In the basement, they found a vault. Inside, 279 firearms, many unregistered. They found a book. Death Scenes, a homicide detective's scrapbook, a collection of crime scene photographs. It was sitting on the kitchen table. They found a disturbing image of a woman's face, blonde, bruised, black pupils. They found a child-sized doll in a wooden and glass cabinet. And they found the planning document, the HK 2002-04 file. 87 points, instructions, troubleshooting, shopping lists, how to prepare a body, how to avoid detection. According to prosecutors, it was created the same year Valerie Mack was murdered. The family. When police told Rex's family about the charges, they were, according to Suffolk County Police Commissioner Harrison, shocked, embarrassed, and disgusted. "I don't believe they knew about this double life Heuermann was living," Harrison said. Ace's attorney, Bob Macedonio, released a statement. After 27 years with Mr. Heuermann, Ms. Ellerup maintains the belief that her husband is not capable of committing these heinous acts. 1 week later, Asa filed for divorce. Not everyone believes the family was unaware. Attorney John Ray, representing other potential victims, held a press conference presenting artwork created by Rex's daughter, Victoria. Dark, violent images. Ray drew parallels to aspects of the murders. He suggested Victoria may have known about her father's crimes, or even been involved. Others pointed out that Victoria's online presence reflected common internet aesthetics among young people. Dark, gothic, macabre, not evidence of complicity. The truth is, we don't know what they knew, or when they knew it. Additional charges. By March 2025, Rex Heuermann had been charged with the murders of 7 women: Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, Jessica Taylor, Sandra Castilla, and Valerie Mack. Investigators believe there may be more victims, as many as 11 more. The investigation continues. The trial is ongoing. The investigation continues. There are still questions that may never be answered. How did he do it for so long? How did no one see? How did a man who worked in Manhattan, who lived with his family, who filed permits and discussed building codes, allegedly maintain this other life without detection? Part of the answer is timing. When these crimes began, the technology we now take for granted, cell phone tracking, DNA databases, digital forensics, was either primitive or non-existent. Serial killers thrived in that window. The 1970s through the 1990s saw a boom in serial murders across the United States. Nearly 770 cases in the 1980s alone. But by the 2000s, that number had dropped below 400. By 2016, it was just over 100. Technology closed the gap. Surveillance cameras, GPS, DNA matching from pizza crusts and discarded bottles. The other part of the answer is simpler and more disturbing. He hid in plain sight. He was ordinary. Awkward, yes. Odd, yes. But not visibly monstrous. Not someone you'd cross the street to avoid.
unless you lived on his block and saw the state of his house. Predators like Rex Heuermann, if the allegations are true, understand camouflage. They build facades. They have families, jobs, routines. They blend in not despite their crimes, but because of how carefully they compartmentalize. Gary Ridgway, John Wayne Gacy, Dennis Rader, all married, all employed, all hiding in plain sight for years. The question isn't how they do it. The question is how we keep failing to see them. If you found this documentary compelling, consider subscribing to Downfall for more deep dives into the cases that haunt us. And if this story affected you, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the conversation is just as important as the story itself. The bodies along Gilgo Beach have been silent for years, but their discovery and the arrest that followed speaks to something we'd rather not acknowledge: that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks among us. Sometimes it goes home at night to a family. Sometimes it files paperwork and argues about building codes and acts like everyone else. Until it doesn't. Rex Heuermann's case may close. The legal system will do what it does. But the larger questions remain. How many others are still out there? How many are watching the news about this case, relieved it isn't them? And how many more victims are still waiting to be found? The story doesn't end here. It never really does.
You've just watched Downfall, Inside the Criminal Mind. More documentaries like this will be dropping soon. Stay tuned.